I'm Julia Monroe, 34 years old, and even after building a multi-million-dollar company from the ground up, I still feel like a stranger in my own family. When my sister Allison texted me the details for our mother's 65th birthday dinner, there was no warmth, just the restaurant name, the time, and a reminder to be punctual. I booked the flight anyway. Part of me hoped this time would be different. But from the second I walked through those glass doors, I could feel it in my bones. The story they'd written about me hadn't changed. And before dessert, I'd be seated beside a storage closet like I didn't belong. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been treated like a guest in your own family. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where families stayed close. Everyone went to church on Sundays, and you could walk into the local bakery and have them know your order by heart. My parents believed in hard work, respect, and keeping your word. Mom made pot roast every Sunday. Dad showed me how to change a tire before I turned 13. Allison fit right into that world. She married her high school sweetheart, bought a house 4 blocks from where we grew up, and never missed a school fundraiser or church raffle. Her life made sense to everyone around her. Steady, familiar, easy to praise. I took a different path. After college, I moved to Chicago, then San Francisco. I spent years eating dollar ramen, sleeping 4 hours a night, and pitching my startup to anyone who'd listen. Most didn't. Some laughed, a few believed. Eventually, I found investors who took a chance. I launched a food tech platform that connects underused commercial kitchens with independent chefs and small food businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered, and it worked. But none of that made it into the family newsletter. The last time I tried to explain what I did to my aunt, she just nodded and said, "So." Catering. My mom once told me gently to just say I worked in food. It was simpler, she said. What she meant was it was easier to explain to the neighbors. Still, when Allison sent that text, I told myself this year would be different. I was coming home on my terms. Not to prove anything, just to show up. The dinner was at Carver House, a polished white tablecloth kind of place that looked like it had been pulled from the pages of a wedding magazine. I arrived early thinking I could settle in without making a scene. Allison spotted me the second I walked in. She looked perfect as always, giving hugs, moving place cards, laughing with cousins like she was hosting a gala. When she turned to me, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're at table B," she said, handing me a card. I followed her gesture across the room. The main table was long and glowing, set with candles and crystal and soft linen napkins. Mine was a small round table against the back wall, near a swinging kitchen door labeled storage. One chair was pulled out. The others were empty. No names, no welcome. It wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't about space. From where I sat, I could see everything Mom at the center. Dad laughing with Uncle Mike, Allison holding court like the proud firstborn. They all looked right at home, and I didn't. I picked up the water glass in front of me. It was already half full and slightly warm. That's when I knew Allison hadn't just chosen my seat. She'd chosen my place. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that just a few days earlier, I had signed the papers that made me part owner of Carver House. She may have picked the chair, but I owned the building. I sat quietly at the small round table near the swinging kitchen door, watching the rest of the room fill with soft laughter and wine glasses clinking. From my seat, I could see everything, the way the main table sparkled under the dim lighting, the way Allison leaned in when she spoke, like she was sharing something important with every cousin and aunt in reach. I saw my mother glance over at me, once her smile small and apologetic, but she didn't move. She didn't call me over. My father was busy talking about lawn care with Uncle Mike, and no one else looked my way. The water in front of me had gone lukewarm, probably poured well before I arrived. I took a small sip and set the glass back down. The silverware at my place setting looked just like the rest, polished, lined up perfectly, but the chair next to mine was pulled out crooked, the others around the table left empty, unassigned. I didn't need to ask if this was intentional. Allison didn't do things halfway. When she wanted to make a point, she made it with centerpieces and lighting, and tonight she'd made sure my place was clear. I opened a text to my assistant Chloe, typed out "classic Allison move," then erased it. I didn't want to give the moment that kind of power. I smoothed the front of my dress, adjusted the napkin across my lap, and took another breath. I'd sat in rooms far less welcoming than this one, rooms with skeptical investors, exhausted suppliers, even reporters waiting for me to fail. This wasn't unfamiliar, but somehow the sting felt sharper when it came with candles and name cards. At the main table, I heard someone say, "She's doing something in food tech, I think." It was my cousin Meredith, tilting her head like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. Aunt Barbara chimed in, "Didn't she drop out of engineering school?" Another voice added, "No, that was before she moved to New York. Or maybe San Francisco." No one asked me. They never did. It was easier to fill in the blanks themselves, to make up a version of me they could understand. I'd stopped trying to explain years ago. When I first told Mom about the business, she'd tried to be supportive, but I could tell it didn't make sense to her. "Just say you work in food," she'd said once. "It's simpler." It was simpler. It also erased nearly every hard-won part of what I'd built. No one in that room knew how many nights I'd stayed up rebuilding a pitch deck after a partner backed out, or how it felt to hear I'd closed a funding round after months of hearing maybe. They just knew Allison's daughter had won the spelling bee. Twice. I heard a soft voice and looked up. A young server stood at the edge of the table holding a tray. "I didn't realize this table was seated," she said gently. "Would you like one?" She offered me a small quiche. I nodded. "Sure, thanks." She placed two on my plate, hesitated, then said, "I'm Maddie. I'll be around if you need anything." There was something in her tone, not just politeness, but a kind of understanding I hadn't expected. "Thanks, Maddie," I said, meaning it. "I'll be fine." She gave a little nod, then moved on. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. Still, no one from the main table turned around. I kept sipping my water, kept watching. I reminded myself that I'd handled worse. Once an investor told me he'd consider funding my company because, in his words, I always bet on passion projects, especially if they come with a pretty face. I didn't flinch then. I wasn't about to now. Maddie came back a little later this time with a plate of fresh appetizers and a bottle of cold water. "Figured you might want something that's not half warm," she said, setting the plate in front of me. "Stuffed mushrooms. Just came out of the kitchen." "Thanks," I said. "I appreciate it." She lingered, then gestured to the chairs around me. "This table's usually where we take our breaks. Hope that's okay." I smiled a little. "It's perfect. I've always liked the back of the house better anyway." "You work in restaurants?" "In a way," I said. "I run a company that partners with restaurants and small food businesses. We help match talent with resources, kitchens, training, logistics." Her eyebrows lifted. "Seriously? That's really cool." Before I could answer, 2 more staff members approached the table. One was a tall young guy with a red name tag that said Ben. The other was a woman in her 40s with short hair and a tray of mini desserts. She set the tray down and raised an eyebrow. "Joining the rebel table, Maddie?" she asked. Maddie gave a half smile. "Kind of." "This is Julia. Her sister." She trailed off. The older woman looked at me, then the table, then back at me. Her voice was warm but matter-of-fact. "Oh, honey, I've worked enough family events to know what that's about." Ben grinned. "My cousin made me sit by the bathroom at her wedding because I wore a tie with cartoon dinosaurs." I laughed unexpectedly. It came out louder than I meant, but no one at the main table noticed. The 3 of them pulled up chairs without hesitation. Maddie told me she was studying food science at the local community college. Ben was saving to transfer to a state school. The older woman, Carla, had been doing events for over a decade. She had stories about drunk uncles and spilled cakes that could rival any kitchen disaster I'd ever faced. They didn't care what I'd built or what I hadn't. They just saw someone who'd been seated at the wrong table and chose to sit beside her. Somewhere between Maddie describing her final project and Carla launching into a story about a flower girl and a chafing dish, the energy in the room shifted. I noticed it first in the posture of the servers straightening, pausing. Even the maitre d' at the bar stood taller, glancing toward the doorway. Then I saw him. Mr. Carter, the general manager of Carver House, walked into the room with calm authority. His gray suit was pressed, his stride deliberate, his expression composed. He waited until the room grew quiet before speaking. "I'd like to take a moment to personally welcome our guests this evening," he said, his voice clear but warm. "It's an honor to host the Monroe family and to help celebrate Mrs. Elaine Monroe's 65th birthday." There was a gentle wave of applause. My mother smiled. Allison sat up a little straighter. Mr. Carter continued, "As some of you may know, Carver House has recently entered a new phase of ownership. We've partnered with a hospitality group known for its commitment to tradition and innovation." Allison tilted her head, curious. "It is my pleasure to introduce someone who has had a remarkable impact on our team and our future," Mr. Carter said. "A person whose leadership helped us make the transition with confidence and whose vision has already shaped how we grow from here." He turned toward me. "Julia Monroe." The room fell silent. Not polite silence, real stunned silence. Even the kitchen door behind me stopped swinging. Every head turned. Every fork paused midair. My father froze. My mother's hand dropped to her lap. Allison didn't move. Her mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. "Julia is one of the founding partners of the group that now owns Carver House," Mr. Carter said. "It's her company's values that convinced us to move forward with this merger, her belief in people over profit, legacy over branding. We're proud to work with her." He walked toward our little table, offering me his hand. "Thank you for entrusting us with your vision, Miss Monroe." I stood. I hadn't planned to, but it felt impossible to stay seated under the weight of so many eyes. "Thank you for preserving the heart of this place," I said. Mr. Carter turned back to the room. "I apologize for any confusion about tonight's seating. Ms. Monroe will, of course, be joining the head table as our honored guest." There was a shuffle of movement. A chair added. A fresh glass brought in. My mother was already wiping tears from her eyes. My father nodded slowly as if trying to catch up. And Allison, she hadn't moved an inch. I picked up my clutch, gave Maddie a quiet smile and whispered, "Thanks for the company." Carla raised her glass toward me. "You always had better people at this table anyway." I started walking toward the front. The applause began again. Hesitant at first, then stronger. Each step forward felt like lifting something heavy off my shoulders. And for the first time that night, I felt the room really felt it. Still warm, still bright, but different now. And so was I. The chair they added for me was wedged between my parents, just to the left of center. Someone had already swapped out the napkin and reset the place setting before I sat down. My mother reached for my hand as I settled in. She didn't say anything, just gave it a squeeze light, but steady. I glanced at her and saw her eyes were damp. My father cleared his throat, then reached for the pitcher of water and poured it into my glass. He passed it without a word. That was about as close to a monologue as he ever gave. The hum of the room slowly returned, but something about it had shifted. Conversation picked up again, forks clinked against plates, but it all felt a little too careful. My presence had changed the rhythm. Across the table, Allison sat motionless, her glass of wine untouched, shoulders still, jaw set. It was the first time I'd seen her without something to say. Someone down the table asked my cousin about college applications. My uncle cracked a joke about retirement. Plates were cleared, new ones arrived. When dessert came lemon tart, my mother's favorite, I noticed she barely touched it. Mr. Carter returned with a bottle of champagne, saying it was on the house. To the woman whose company helped save us, he said, "Everyone raised their glass, even my dad." He muttered something about being proud of both his daughters. Allison didn't lift hers. She stood instead. "I'm going to the restroom," she said, not looking at anyone. Her voice was flat. Her footsteps were quiet as she left the room. No one followed her, no one except me. I stepped away from the table a minute later, slipping through the wide hallway that led to the restrooms. The carpet muffled my steps. I pushed the door open gently and found her standing at the marble sink, hands gripping the edge, eyes locked on her reflection. "You didn't have to come in here," she said, still looking in the mirror. "I know," I said. The silence stretched, then she spoke again. "You win," she said softly. "Congratulations." I stayed by the door. It was never a competition. She turned toward me. "Maybe not to you, but it was to me." She wasn't angry. Not really. Her voice was tired, strained at the edges. Her posture, always so firm and poised, looked like it was holding something up that had started to collapse. "I hated watching you succeed," she said. "Not because you didn't deserve it, but because it reminded me that I never even tried." I didn't speak. I wasn't sure I could. "I stayed," she went on. "I followed the rules. I got married, raised the kids, joined the neighborhood board, baked the cupcakes, sent the birthday cards. And somehow, I still feel like no one sees me." Her voice broke a little on the last part. She looked at me fully now, her mascara smudged slightly beneath her eyes. "Do you know what it's like," she said, "to live 4 blocks from the house we grew up in and still feel invisible?" I stepped forward. "Do you know what it's like to build something from nothing in a city where no one cares about your last name? To come home and still be treated like the reckless one?" She blinked, and for a moment neither of us looked away. "I wasn't trying to outshine you, Allison," I said. "I just wanted to matter. Somewhere. To someone. And maybe I thought that if I made it big enough, you'd finally say you were proud of me." She leaned back against the wall, folded her arms, looked down at the floor. "I am," she said quietly. "Proud of you, I mean. I just didn't know how to say it, without feeling like I was disappearing." "I never wanted you to disappear," I said. "I just wanted a seat at the same table." Her laugh was short, dry. "Well, you ended up owning the table." We both stood there for a long moment. No more defenses, no more performances. Just 2 women, 2 sisters, trying to find a way back from something that had been growing between us for years. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say. "You know, Carver House is looking for a new community liaison. Someone local. Someone who understands the town, the people. Someone who knows how to lead." She looked at me sideways. "Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a bridge," I said. "A way for us to stop pretending we're living on separate islands." She didn't answer right away. "What if I fail?" she asked. "You won't," I said. "But if you do, I'll be there." We stood like that for another minute, not saying much. Then she turned back to the mirror, wiped under her eyes, and checked her reflection. "I should probably go back out there before Mom sends someone," she said. I nodded. She always could sense drama from across a room. We opened the door together. "Julia," she said just before we stepped into the hallway. "Yeah, thanks for seeing me, for letting me." I nodded once. "Anytime." We walked back in side by side. The dining room had settled into that easy lull that follows dessert. Plates pushed aside, coffee cups half full, laughter in pockets, conversations branching off into smaller circles. Mom caught sight of us first. Her eyes lit up and she reached across the table to take both our hands. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Allison sat down beside me, no stiffness this time, just quiet. The air between us didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt different, not perfect, but possible. As the evening wound down and guests began gathering their coats, I stepped out onto the garden terrace with her. The air was cool and soft, the kind that wraps around you like a curtain. We stood side by side, the sounds of silverware and soft music fading behind us. I meant what I said I told her, about the position. She looked at me, half cautious, half curious. "You really think I'd be good at it?" "I know you would," I said. "You're organized, you're sharp. You know how to make people feel heard. That's exactly what this place needs." She didn't answer right away. "It wouldn't be charity, no," I said firmly. "It would be trust." She exhaled slowly. "Brad's going to think I've lost my mind." "Let him," I smiled. "You can remind him you once ran the school fundraiser with 3 volunteers and a broken copier." She laughed, a real laugh this time, the kind I hadn't heard in years. God, that copier. I still have nightmares about the toner. We stood there for a while longer, not needing to say much. Then she said softly, "You know what scares me most?" I turned toward her. "That if I take this job, and I love it, I'll realize I've wasted all these years doing what I thought I was supposed to do, instead of what I actually wanted." I nodded. "It's not too late to want something else. Not ever." She crossed her arms more out of comfort than defense. "I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking." We headed back inside to say our goodbyes. Something had shifted, not just between us, but inside us. We left the garden terrace in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because for the first time in a long time, nothing needed translation. The dining room had mostly cleared out by then. A few relatives were still lingering near the coffee station, finishing up slices of cake or gathering coats from the back of chairs. Inside, the clatter of silverware being packed away echoed softly behind the hum of conversation. Mom was speaking to a second cousin. I barely recognized her voice, lighter hand resting near the centerpiece. Dad stood nearby, half listening, half watching the staff box up leftovers into foil containers. Allison and I stepped back into the room together. No grand re-entry, no glances exchanged across the table, just 2 sisters returning from somewhere neither of us had ever planned to go. No one commented on our absence. No one had to. Mom looked up the second we passed the main table and gave us that familiar, quiet smile. The one she used when someone finally said the thing no one else would. She reached across and squeezed both our hands as we passed. There was no speech, no lecture, just that steady, mother-of-daughters kind of gesture that carried more weight than words ever could. Allison sat down beside me again this time, not with the stiff poise of someone trying to preserve a reputation, but with the ease of someone who had just let go of something too heavy. My own shoulders felt different too, less braced, less armored. We didn't say much for the rest of the evening. There wasn't a need. The tension that had wrapped itself around us for years had thinned like fabric, worn down by time and touch. After goodbyes were said and hugs exchanged, I stepped outside again, letting the door ease shut behind me. The night air had cooled just slightly enough to catch in the collar of my jacket. I stood on the front steps for a moment, just breathing. I heard the door creak behind me. Allison came out wrapping her cardigan tighter as she joined me on the sidewalk. "You meant what you said, didn't you?" she asked. "About the position?" I did. I said. They need someone who understands this place, who knows what people here care about. And you've always been good at bringing people together. She looked out across the street, where a row of parked cars reflected the soft light from the restaurant sign. "I don't even know where I'd start. You start the same way I did," I told her. You show up and you figure it out one step at a time. She gave a small nod, but I could see the hesitation still working behind her eyes. It wouldn't be some kind of favor. No, I said gently. It would be a start, for both of us. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. A week later on a Sunday morning, my phone buzzed while I was pouring coffee into a chipped mug I'd brought back from my first apartment in San Francisco. It was a text from Allison. Stopped by Carver House this morning, sat in the garden, thought about things, let's talk. That was all it said, but it was enough. Later that same day, I drove to Mom's for brunch. She hadn't hosted in a while, just a simple meal she'd said. Pancakes, fresh berries, a few mismatched mugs pulled from the cupboard we all knew too well. The wooden table had been refinished sometime in the late 90s, but the legs still wobbled if you leaned too hard on the left side. The coffee pot was already on the scent, filling the house the way it used to on school mornings. Allison was already there when I arrived. Her kids were on the floor in the living room building towers out of blocks and pretending not to listen. She handed me a mug when I walked in, then nodded toward the kitchen. "I saved you the corner seat," she said with a grin. "Figured you'd want the view of the syrup lineup." I laughed, and she passed me the maple the berry and the one that claimed to be butter-flavored but never quite was. No one brought up the gala. No one needed to. The air felt different, lighter. We passed plates, swapped stories, even disagreed playfully about whether pancakes should be thick or thin. Allison refilled my coffee cup without asking. I handed her the strawberries when her daughter reached up with sticky fingers. Dad came in halfway through, muttered something about traffic and parking, then sat down and buttered toast like it was any other Sunday morning. And somewhere between folding napkins and reaching for more napkins, I realized something. This wasn't about reclaiming a seat. This was about building a new table. We hadn't erased the years behind us. We hadn't undone the silence or the distance. But we had chosen something else right there between the syrup and the spilled juice box. We'd chosen to show up, to keep showing up, to let things be honest, even messy. Allison glanced across the table at me after pouring herself another cup of coffee. So she said slowly, "If I were to consider that job, what would the first week look like?" I smiled. "We'd start with the garden. That's where everything's been growing lately." She chuckled. "Guess that's as good a place as any." She didn't need to decide right then. She'd already taken the first step. The following Wednesday, I got a text around noon. "Could I shadow you one morning at Carver, just to see what it's really like?" It was from Allison. No punctuation, no emoji, just cautious curiosity. I replied with a time and told her to meet me by the staff entrance. I didn't say I was surprised. I didn't say I'd been quietly hoping for this exact message since the day we stood on that terrace. I just sent the address and told her I'd meet her there. Friday morning came clear and cool, the kind of early fall day that smelled faintly like changing leaves and fresh bread from the bakery down the block. I arrived a few minutes early and chatted with Maddie near the walk-in delivery entrance. She was restocking pastry trays and humming to herself. She didn't ask who I was waiting for. She just handed me a coffee and kept working. At 8:58, Allison turned the corner in jeans and a cardigan, clutching a notebook like she wasn't sure if she was arriving for a meeting or a test. She gave a small wave, almost shy, and I opened the side door for her. "This way," I said, stepping inside. The back corridor of Carver House wasn't glamorous. It smelled like citrus cleaner and fresh linen. Crates of produce were lined against the wall, and a cart with extra silverware passed us slowly as we moved toward the main prep area. A few staff nodded as we passed. Allison stayed close behind, taking it all in. We started in the event office. Carla was already there, sorting paperwork into colored folders. She looked up when she saw us. "Well, if it isn't my favorite sister," Carla said with a grin. Allison blinked. "You mean her or—" "You'll find out by lunch. Carla said, handing me a clipboard and gesturing toward the calendar pinned above the desk. Walk through at 10, vendor call at 11, then a tasting with the local farm group at 2. Want her to sit in or float? She'll shadow me for now, I said. We'll see where it makes sense. Allison followed me through the building like someone stepping into a story she hadn't been told before. She paused outside the main dining room as the prep crew adjusted table settings and tested out lighting. She asked questions quietly. How often do they rotate the menu? Where does the staff eat? How do you manage vendors when the orders get backed up? She wasn't just being polite, she was absorbing every detail. By noon, she was jotting notes in the margins of her little notebook, flipping it open between conversations. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't name-drop PTA committees or mention her time organizing school auctions. She just listened. When the vendor call started, we sat in the back office while our head of purchasing walked through local sourcing updates. Allison watched the screen without interrupting, scribbling something now and then. When we ended the call, she looked at me. That was more interesting than I expected. You'll get used to the spreadsheets, I said. The hard part is knowing which part of the story you're trying to tell. She nodded, then flipped to a fresh page in her notebook. At 2, we joined the tasting group in the garden. A new supplier had brought fresh herbs, honey, and a few sample cheeses. The chef team laid everything out on platters near the patio, and the late sun warmed the edges of the space. Carla joined us with a half-empty mug of tea. Sit, she said, waving at the chairs. Taste. Ask questions. No one's grading you. Allison hesitated, then sat down and picked up a slice of aged cheddar. She let it melt on her tongue, then asked the supplier about the grazing patterns of the cows. He answered with a quiet smile. After the meeting, Carla pulled me aside. She's sharp, she said. Bit quiet, but she sees everything. I know, I replied. She asking for a job? Not yet. Let me know when she does. I nodded. That night I walked Allison to her car. She stood with the door open, keys in her hand, but didn't get in right away. Do you ever get tired of all the moving parts, she asked. Sometimes, I said, but I've learned which ones can wait. She nodded slowly. It's different than I expected. How so? It's not cold. It's not about who's in charge. It's just clear. Like everyone knows what they're doing matters. They do. She looked down at her keys. I didn't know I'd like it, she said. You don't have to decide tonight. She nodded again, then finally opened the car door. Let me know if you want help with Saturday's event, she said. Even just the welcome signage. I've got an eye for font spacing. Font spacing's a serious matter, I replied. She smiled. I've been saying that for years. I watched her drive off. The tail lights disappeared around the corner, and I stood there for another moment, letting the quiet settle. Inside, the staff was finishing up for the day. Someone was folding napkins. Maddie was wiping down the espresso machine. Carla was laughing in the back room. And for the first time, the space didn't feel like mine alone. It felt shared. Saturday's event was a retirement luncheon. 50 guests, mostly local, mostly longtime friends of the guest of honor. It was the kind of thing Carver House did well. Natural light pouring through the tall windows, linen runners over polished oak tables, fresh floral centerpieces that smelled like late September. Carla and I walked the floor early, checking the table layout and making sure the buffet line had enough space for both the guests and the photographer to move through. Allison arrived an hour before the doors opened. She wore a pressed button-down, her hair pulled back, and carried a clipboard that wasn't one of mine. I glanced at it and saw a detailed schedule in her handwriting color-coded. I hope that's not overstepping, she said as she walked up beside me. No, I said. That's preparation. She nodded once, then looked out across the room. I saw the menu was finalized with Chef Laura. Figured I'd greet the vendors at the back entrance and double-check the name tags while I wait. Carla, passing with a stack of menus, gave a low whistle. "Watch out," she said. "She's got systems." Allison smiled but didn't respond. She had a job to do and already knew what it was. By mid-morning, the event was in motion. Guests arrived in waves, shaking off coats, scanning the seating chart, complimenting the garden. Allison stood near the entrance with one of the servers, quietly directing arrivals and catching small details before they became issues. She adjusted a name card that had flipped in the breeze. She caught a missed vegetarian tag and rerouted the server with a nod. She didn't ask permission. She didn't explain herself. She just moved. At one point, Maddie came up beside me and nodded toward her. "She's good," she said. "She is," I replied. "She going to stay?" I looked across the room at Allison, who was speaking gently to a woman whose shoes were clearly too new for standing. "I hope so," I said. The event itself went off without a hitch. Speeches ran long but never off topic. The food landed on time and the drinks stayed topped off. Allison stepped in when the sound system glitched during the second toast, calmly guiding the speaker closer to the front and adjusting the mic volume with the quiet confidence of someone who had figured out more chaotic school assemblies than she could count. After the last guest left, the staff gathered in the back for a short debrief. Carla offered praise for the team and highlighted the clean execution. She turned to Allison at the end and said, "You've got the instincts. It's rare. You sure you haven't done this before?" Allison let out a short laugh. "Not like this," she said. "Mostly school carnivals and silent auctions. But I liked it." Carla nodded. "That part's important." We left the building together. The sun was starting to dip and the parking lot was mostly empty. She stood by her car and turned to me. "If I were to take this seriously," she said, "what would it look like?" "We'd start with a title," I said. "Community Liaison. You'd manage local outreach, coordinate with vendors, help shape our public-facing events. It's a leadership role, not just supportive." She took that in without blinking. "And if I mess up, you fix it," I said. "Same as anyone else." She looked down, then back up. Okay, I'll do it. I want to try." That Monday, I sent over the onboarding paperwork. She returned it signed before lunch. Carla assigned her a desk. Ben helped set up her access badge. By Thursday, Allison was on the call with the Regional Tourism Board speaking confidently about Carver House's plans for winter programming. At Friday's staff lunch, she pulled out a folder of ideas for a community harvest dinner and passed them around like she'd been doing this for years. Maddie asked if there'd be music. Carla asked if we had enough heaters for the outdoor space. And I watched my sister take notes, lead the discussion, and adjust on the fly when the numbers didn't quite line up. Later, while I was reorganizing files in the back office, Carla stepped in and leaned against the doorframe. "She fits," she said. "I know. She's got a good way with people, makes them feel heard." I nodded. She always did. "She's not here because of you, you know," Carla said. I looked up. "She's here because she wants to be." I didn't answer right away. I just reached for the next stack of folders and kept working. That weekend, Allison texted to ask if I wanted to grab coffee. We met at the small cafe downtown, the one we used to pass on our way to school, but never went into as kids. We sat at a table by the window sipping from mismatched mugs. "I've been thinking about something," she said after a while. "All these years, I assumed you didn't come back because you didn't care. And I thought you kept your distance because you didn't want me around," I said. We sat there for a long time without saying much. The air between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was just full of things unspoken, slowly making room for something else. "I'm glad I came," she said. "I am too." The community harvest dinner took shape faster than we expected. Carla secured the tent rental. Maddie coordinated volunteers from the local culinary school. Ben handled social media and flyers, and Allison, with her clipboard-colored tabs and uncanny ability to remember names, became the unofficial point person. 2 weeks out, she had a full schedule drawn up, set up Windows prep stations, lighting logistics. She even built a spreadsheet to track food donations by category and time of arrival. "I color-coded by storage temperature," she said one afternoon, sliding a printout across the table. "You're terrifying," I replied, taking a sip of coffee. "And organized," she added with a grin. The Thursday before the event, we were at Carver House until almost 10. Allison stayed behind with the kitchen team, helping label chafing dishes and walking through the heating schedule with Chef Laura. When I returned from the garden, she was sitting at the back table, the same one I'd been placed at on Mom's birthday, sipping ginger tea and scribbling on a notepad. "You know," she said, not looking up, "this table's not so bad, once you claim it for yourself." I pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "You've made it your own. I think that's what I was waiting for all along, a space I didn't have to fight for." We sat quietly for a few minutes, the clink of pots and soft murmur of cleanup in the distance. "You fought for more than that," I said. She shrugged. "I used to think success had to look a certain way, safe, predictable, approved, but lately I've been wondering if maybe it just has to feel real." The day of the harvest dinner, the courtyard glowed. String lights stretched from one side to the other, soft and warm. Long wooden tables ran the length of the patio, lined with mason jar centerpieces and cloth napkins folded just so. Children darted between tables carrying small pumpkins. The band tuned up quietly in the far corner near the heaters. By 5 o'clock, the crowd had doubled. Local farmers mingled with teachers and retirees. Parents brought pies. Someone donated cider. Laura's team rotated trays of roasted squash, glazed carrots, cornbread, and herb chicken from the back kitchen like clockwork. Allison moved between tables like she'd done it for years, not rushed, not showy, just steady. She greeted folks by name, answered questions, redirected last-minute changes without flinching. At one point, a neighbor leaned over and said to me, "She's good at this. Born for it, seems like." I nodded. She is. After dinner, Carla called the team to the side for a quick check-in before teardown. "Smoothest large-scale event we've run this year," she said. "Credit where it's due that's on leadership." Everyone looked at Allison. She blinked. "I just made sure people were where they needed to be." "Exactly," Carla said. "That's what leadership is." Cleanup went fast. Folding chairs stacked neatly, leftovers packed and delivered to the community fridge. The lights came down. People lingered a little longer, just talking, leaning against brick walls with paper cups of cider, reluctant to let the night end too quickly. Around 9, I stood at the back entrance watching the last few guests say goodnight. Allison came out beside me, hair pinned up clipboard tucked under one arm. "I forgot how much I love nights like this," she said. "You've got the touch," I replied. She looked out at the courtyard, mostly empty now, save for a few bundled-up volunteers. "I feel different," she said. "Not bigger, just steadier. Like I'm finally walking into a life that feels like mine." "You are." She looked over. "Thanks for giving me space to figure that out. You gave it to yourself." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Think Mom saw all this coming." I smiled. I think she always hoped we'd land somewhere we could meet in the middle. Allison chuckled. "We've still got different rhythms, but the same tempo," I said. The door behind us creaked open. Carla stuck her head out. "You two coming back in, or are we leaving you to hold down the fort?" Allison turned. "We're coming." We followed her back into the hallway, the warmth of the kitchen spilling out into the corridor. Steam from a running dishwasher, voices calling out goodnight's trays being stacked and wheeled into storage. As we stepped through, I glanced at Allison. She was still holding that clipboard, but it looked more like part of her than something she was carrying. She'd found her place, not because someone gave it to her, but because she built it piece by piece. The week after the harvest dinner, things at Carver House returned to their usual rhythm. Vendors came and went, event requests picked up ahead of the holidays, and the kitchen buzzed with prep work for the weekend crowd. But something in the air felt different. Calmer, maybe. Fuller. Allison had started leaving her clipboard at her desk more often. She knew the flow now, when to step in, when to delegate, when to let the room breathe. Carla began looping her into planning meetings without needing to ask, and Maddie started bringing her questions directly to her instead of to me. One afternoon, I found her on the garden patio with two of the servers walking through the layout for a fundraiser dinner. The breeze was light, the map she'd drawn fluttering at the edges as she held it down with her hand. She looked up and saw me watching from the doorway. "We're thinking lanterns along the hedge," she said. "Simple but warm." I nodded. "It's a good idea." She smiled and turned back to her team, her voice steady, her presence easy. She wasn't performing anymore. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She belonged, and she knew it. That Sunday we met for brunch at Mom's again. Same old table, same old coffee pot, the smell of cinnamon and bacon drifting through the kitchen like it always had. Dad was already seated flipping through the paper. Mom was humming at the stove, spooning scrambled eggs onto a platter. Allison came in through the back door, her kids ahead of her shedding coats and chattering about a school art project. She brought muffins this time, cranberry orange, still warm, and set them on the counter without fuss. We all sat down together. No assigned seats, no distance. Just the five of us passing dishes and sharing stories like time hadn't carved so many years between the versions of us that once sat at this same table. At one point, Mom looked across at Allison and said, "I saw your name on the flyer for the fundraiser next month. Looked real nice." Allison nodded. "We're partnering with the food pantry." Carla had the idea. Mom smiled. "I'm glad you're enjoying the work." "I am," she said quietly. "More than I expected." And that was all. Later, as we cleared plates and packed up leftovers, Allison leaned over and nudged my arm. "You know, I think we were always meant to work side by side. We just didn't know how yet." I looked at her. "Maybe we had to lose our place at the old table to find the right one." She nodded. "We didn't fix everything." "No," I said. "But we built something better. Not cleaner, not simpler, but real." That's the thing no one tells you about justice. It doesn't always come in dramatic moments or loud applause. Sometimes it shows up in quiet places, in showing up again, in choosing each other after all the noise has settled, in building a new kind of table, one where there's room to be seen for who you truly are. And maybe that's all any of us really want, a place to belong, not because someone made room, but because we claimed it together. Thanks for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of someone or of a time you had to stand your ground quietly, I hope you'll share it. And if you're still finding your place, keep going. There's room for you here.